President Trump took to Twitter to respond directly to the attack this morning, writing, quote, "Many dead, including women and children, in mindless chemical attack in Syria. Area of atrocity is in lockdown and encircled by Syrian army, making it completely inaccessible to outside world. President Putin, Russia, and Iran are responsible for backing Animal Assad. Big price to pay, open area, immediately for medical help and verification. Another humanitarian disaster for no reason whatsoever. Sick."
There will be another missile attack?
I wouldn't take anything off the table. These are horrible photos. We're looking into the attack at this point. The State Department put out a statement last night, and the President's senior national security cabinet have been talking with him and with each other all throughout the evening and this morning, and myself included.
President Putin, Russia, and Iran are responsible for backing Animal Assad. Big price to pay. Tom Bosser told me nothing's off the table.
Well, it's a defining moment in his presidency because he has challenged Assad in the past not to use chemical weapons. We had a one-and-done a missile attack, so Assad's at it again. They see us, our resolve breaking. They see our determination to stay in Syria waning, and it's no accident they use chemical weapons. But President Trump can reset the table here. To me, I would destroy Assad's air force. I would create safe zones in Syria where people can come back to their country from the surrounding area. And live a better life, train up Syrians to take on Assad so we can negotiate in Geneva from a position of strength. If it becomes a tweet without meaning, then he's hurt himself with North Korea. If he doesn't follow through and live up to that tweet, he's going to look weak in the eyes of Russia and Iran. So this is a defining moment, Mr. President. You need to follow through with that tweet, show a resolve that Obama never did to get this right.
Last time this happened, the president did a targeted attack to take out some of the facilities. That may be an option that we should consider now.
General Joseph Dunford testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee on his nomination to serve a second term as chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Topics included his assessments of ongoing threats to the U.S. and global security, including the actions and postures of Russia, North Korea, China, Iran, and Syria. This hearing is 2.5 hours.
Since the quorum is now present, I ask the committee to consider a list of 3,196 pending military nominations. All of these nominations have been before the committee the required length of time. Is there a motion to favorably report these 3,196 military nominations to the Senate?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. The committee meets this morning to consider the nomination of General Joseph Dunford for reappointment as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General Dunford, this committee thanks you for your decades of distinguished service to our nation. We are grateful to your wife, Ellen, for the support that she has always provided to you and to all who serve our nation in uniform. I'd also like to welcome your son, Patrick. Fortunately, you look like your mother, Patrick. Thank you. Who is joining us this morning. I know that your other children, Joe and Kathleen, send their support from afar, even as I bet they are a little relieved that they do not have to sit through your interrogation. In order to exercise its legislative and oversight responsibilities, it's important that this committee and other appropriate committees of the Congress are able to receive testimony, briefings, and other communications of information. Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
I have, Chairman.
Do you agree when asked to give your personal views, even if those views differ from the administration in power?
I do, Chairman.
Have you assumed any duties or undertaken any actions which would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
I have not, Chairman.
Will you ensure your staff complies with deadlines established for requested communications, including questions for the record in hearings?
I will, Chairman.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes, Chairman.
Will those witnesses be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
They will be, Chairman.
Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify upon request before this committee?
I do, Chairman.
Do you agree to provide documents, including the copies of electronic forms of communication, in a timely manner when requested by a duly constituted committee, or to consult with the committee regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such documents?
I do, Chairman.
And my colleagues and I are aware that that is a routine, but given the political environment today, especially, and certainly not any reflection on you, General Dunford, but those questions need to be asked. And I thank you for your responses. General Dunford, my colleagues and I will have a lot of questions for you about the many pressing national security challenges we face, but this hearing also offers an opportunity to reflect on some broader topics that have historically and more recently been a major focus of this committee's efforts: the unique role of the chairman in our national security structure and the state of civil-military relations. As, quote, principal military advisor to the President, the National Security Council, the Secretary of Defense, and the Congress, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is the most important military duty in our nation. The Chairman is the one military officer with the authority to present comprehensive analysis and advice to civilian policy makers, informed by all the military services and combatant commands, and spanning every global and functional issue of national security. This responsibility is now more important than ever. Our country faces a multitude of national security challenges, all of which cut across the regional and functional organizations that divide up the Department of Defense. The Chairman is the only military officer with a truly comprehensive perspective on the joint force, on all the threats we face worldwide, and the interplay between them. That is why this committee acted last year to clarify the Chairman's statutory responsibility to advise civilian leaders on the global strategic integration of our military efforts. The Chairman's unique role lends extra gravity to the responsibility that you and every military officer possesses: the responsibility to provide best military advice to civilian leaders. This is not a luxury. It is a duty. It is a duty that military officers owe to the American people and to the men and women under their command. Civilian policymakers in both the executive and legislative branches rely on our military professionals to better understand the military dimensions of the national security challenges we face and the options at our disposal for wielding military power effectively. But best military advice does not stop there. Military officers, and especially the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, must tell their civilian superiors what action they believe are best and right to take, and they must do so honestly, candidly, respectfully, but forcefully, whether civilians want to hear it or not. Best military advice may be disregarded, but it must always be given. What's more, in my opinion, best military advice should not be narrowly limited to technical military matters. When the Chairman offers his best military advice, he's not simply offering the best advice about the military, but rather the best advice from the military. And that extends to issues of national security policy, strategy, and operations. For example, the decision to take our nation to war properly rests with civilians. It's a policy question, but military officers should not be prohibited from voicing their advice on such a matter. Indeed, it is their duty to do so. If you haven't seen Mr. Burns' series on Vietnam, I suggest that you pay attention to it, and I suggest that you examine the tensions that existed between the civilian superiors and the military. And I believe that you will come to the conclusion that the military advice was not given the weight and effect that it should have, which was one of the factors in leading to 58,000 names on the wall in granite not too far from here. Just as we are clear about what constitutes best military advice, we must be equally clear about its limitation. Advice is just that, advice. The chairman as principal military advisor is not in the chain of command. Ours is not a general staff system. In our system, operational command rests with combatant commanders who report by law to the Secretary of Defense. The chairman must also advise civilian leaders on the military dimensions of strategy, operations, and plans, both within and among our combatant commander's area of responsibility, and it is his right, indeed his responsibility, to provide competing advice to policymakers when he disagrees with combatant commanders. But the chairman is not an operational commander. Similarly, best military advice does not mean independent advice. It occurs in the context of civil-military relations, and I want to say a few words on this in closing. Professor Elliott Cohen has described civil-military relations as an unequal dialogue. Civilian and military rules are not to be dichotomized and held apart. Rather, they must be brought together through an iterative process of discussing, scrutinizing, and refining military strategy, operations, and plans, a process in which civilian leaders must play an active role and make the major decisions. Best military advice is central to this dialogue, but it can never replace it. Unfortunately, I sense that this civil-military dialogue has become strained. At times, civilian officials have disrespected military leaders, disregarded their advice on critical military matters, and shirked accountability for their decisions. More recently, civilian oversight and control of the military has morphed into meddling and micromanagement of tactical details for political purposes, which has harmed military effectiveness. The last administration distinguished itself in this regard. What we must guard against, General Dunford, especially now, when so many civilian leaders at the Department of Defense are either missing or are themselves recently retired military officers, is an overcorrection. We cannot afford to swing from civilian micromanagement to civilian marginalization. We need to restore balance in civil-military relations where best military advice is always rendered and received, but is done so as part of a dialogue with civilians who participate actively and have the last word on policy, strategy, operations, and plans. This committee takes its obligations seriously in this regard. The civil-military dialogue does not only occur within the Department of Defense, it occurs between the branches of government as well. That's why the chairman also serves as a principal military advisor to the Congress. And that's why, as part of the confirmation process, we ask current and future chairmen, like all military officers, to provide their best personal advice to this committee if asked. It is to ensure that the members of this committee and the full Congress are able to meet our independent constitutional responsibilities to the Americans we serve. At present, this committee and the Congress more broadly is not receiving the information and respect it deserves as a co-equal branch of government. We do not work for the president or the executive branch. We have distinct and equal responsibilities under the Constitution, and the administration needs to understand its obligation to the Congress in this regard. Too often, members of this committee are learning in the media for the first time about major national security and military activities that we, as the Committee of Oversight, should be told about and consulted on in advance. Even now, nearly 10 months into this year, we are told we have a new strategy for Afghanistan, but members of this committee have far more questions than answers. The administration must do better, and until it does, the Congress and this committee will be forced to use what levers we have to show the administration that we are not and will not be a rubber stamp. We will have many questions for you, General. We look forward to your candid, forthright, and best military advice. Senator Reid.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I also want to welcome General Dunford this morning and thank you for his outstanding service to this nation over many years. General Dunford is joined by his wife Ellen and son Patrick. Thank you. And also like to acknowledge the General's other children, Joe and Kathleen, who are not able to join us today. And on behalf of our committee, we thank the entire Dunford family for their continued sacrifice and support. It means a great deal to us, but more particularly to the men and women of the armed forces. Thank you. Under the leadership of Chairman McCain, this committee has maintained a robust hearing schedule focused on the most pressing threats and challenges facing our armed forces. Our committee has heard from the most senior political leaders in the department, the highest echelons of the military, and distinguished outside experts. Time and again, these hearings have underscored that the United States is faced with a myriad of challenges that offer no quick or easy solutions and require adroit military leadership. During General Dunford's tenure as chairman, he has provided sound military counsel and demonstrated a deep understanding of the national security threats our nation must address. As chairman, General Dunford has made it a priority to keep this committee well informed on the department's policy decisions impacting our armed forces and changes to our military strategy to counter the risks posed by our adversaries. While this committee may not always agree with General Dunford's views, he has been honest and conducted himself with integrity. Therefore, I believe he should be reappointed to serve as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. As we pause to consider the state of the world today, General Dunford's professionalism and commitment to duty have served him well. This is not the first time in our nation's history that we have had to confront multiple threats from abroad, but it is an incredibly dangerous and uncertain time. North Korea's nuclear missile program poses an immediate and grave national security threat, and heightened tensions on the peninsula are a deep cause for concern. The global order established by the United States following World War II is under siege by a revanchist Russia determined to reassert its influence around the world. China continues its saber-rattling in the Asia-Pacific region by undermining the freedom of navigation and using economic coercion of its smaller, more vulnerable neighbors. Iran continues their aggressive weapons development activities, including ballistic missile development efforts, as well as other destabilizing activities in the region. Finally, our military has been consumed by two prolonged wars against violent extremist groups like ISIS that has sapped readiness and precluded our military personnel from training for full-spectrum operations. As we grapple with these threats, we must also be mindful that our President continues to show a lack of in-depth knowledge or nuance in foreign policy and defense matters. It had been my sincere hope that the magnitude of the office, coupled with the enormous challenges we face, would have encouraged the President to be more judicious with his comments and thoughtful with his actions. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. To date, our foreign policy has been predicated on alienating longtime allies, discounting the value of international organizations and our global commitments, and retreating from our leadership role in the world. While at the same time, decisions on our defense posture and complicated military personnel issues are promulgated by presidential tweet. Such trends lend more uncertainty to already dangerous times, and I believe the risk of miscalculation and unintended consequences have never been higher. Resolute leadership at the highest echelons of our military is a necessity, now more than ever. I commend General Dunford for the steady hand he has demonstrated in guiding the Joint Chiefs during his tenure as chairman, and for the sterling example he has set for all those that wear the uniform. Thank you again, General Dunford, for your willingness to serve our nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General Dunford, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm honored to be renominated as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'd like to begin by thanking the committee for your support of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. This year's National Defense Authorization Act is a reflection of your commitment to ensure that they remain the most well-trained, well-equipped, and capable military force in the world. Today, we have a competitive advantage over any adversary, and I can say with confidence that our armed forces are ready to protect the homeland and meet our alliance commitments. However, that advantage has eroded in recent years. If reconfirmed, I look forward to working together with the committee to ensure that the chairman testifying in 2025 has the same degree of confidence in our ability to provide for the common defense. This committee is keenly aware of today's complex and volatile security environment. Both the chairman and the ranking member have mentioned it, and I don't expect the strategic landscape to improve in the near future. Russia continues to invest in a full range of capabilities designed to limit our power projection, erode U.S. influence, and undermine the credibility of the NATO alliance. Similarly, China is focused on limiting our ability to project power and weakening our alliances in the Pacific. Iran is projecting malign influence across the Middle East, threatening freedom of navigation while supporting terrorist organizations in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. And while we're all focused on the destabilizing threat posed by North Korea and Kim Jong-un's relentless pursuit of a nuclear intercontinental ballistic missile that can threaten the United States, we are also confronted by al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other trans-regional terrorist organizations. And while we've made significant progress against core ISIS in Iraq and Syria, we are not complacent, and much work remains to be done. In Afghanistan, we are beginning to deploy additional U.S. and coalition forces in support of the President's broader South Asia strategy. In the context of these and other challenges, we need a renewed focus to restore joint readiness and develop the warfighting capabilities we'll need to defend the nation in the future. As this committee has highlighted in hearings, we face very real and significant readiness challenges today, and we have failed to adequately invest in the future. I can't state it any clearer. If we don't address this dynamic with sustained, sufficient, and predictable funding over the course of several years, we will lose our qualitative and quantitative competitive advantage. In the end, this will have a profound effect on our ability to deter conflict and to respond effectively if deterrence fails. If reconfirmed, I'll commit to working with the administration and the Congress in addressing these challenges to ensure our men and women in uniform never find themselves in a fair fight. Chairman, I listened very carefully to your opening statement. I fully understand my responsibilities to provide candid best military advice to the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council, and I'll be forthright when I'm asked to appear before this committee and other congressional venues. And with that, I'm prepared to answer your questions.
Well, thank you very much, General. In June, you testified without sustained, sufficient, and predictable funding, I assess that within 5 years, we will lose our ability to project power. We still don't have sustained, sufficient, and predictable funding, and as you mentioned, I'm not sure we will for the foreseeable future unless Congress finally steps up to do its job. As you know, we'll start fiscal year 2018 on a continuing resolution with no insight into what the final funding levels will be for the year. What's the effect of the average first lieutenant who's out there, captain, has a company command, and they don't have sufficient funds to carry out their training regimen, and their pilots are flying less hours per month than their Chinese and Russian counterparts. First of all, what effect does that have on our ability to defend the nation? And second of all, what does it do to the men and women of the all-volunteer force?
Chairman, I'll answer the first part. When you say what does it do to our ability to defend the nation, and when I in my opening remarks I mentioned competitive advantage, and we've done some very careful analysis about where are the current threats, and we use largely Russia and China to benchmark our capabilities. And if you go back to 1999 or 2000, we had what we should have as the United States of America, a nation that thinks and acts globally. We had a significant competitive advantage in our ability to project power when and where needed to advance our national interests. I can't say that today. We are challenged in our ability to project power both to Europe and in the Pacific as a result of those threats. And other nations, to include non-state actors as well, have capabilities on the high end that challenge our ability to project power. So over time, that has eroded. With regard to the question about lieutenants and captains, I think I have some insight into that in the sense that I was a platoon commander in the late 1970s, and I lived through a period of time when we weren't properly resourced, we didn't have sufficient money for training, we didn't have sufficient personnel, and many times the tasks that we were asked exceeded our capability. I think it has to do with the confidence, and I would give you an example of a pilot. If you look at a pilot specifically, you know, in the past, pilots might have had 30 hours a month to fly. Now they may be down as low as 15 hours a month. On a day-to-day basis, you may not be able to see the difference between pilot A and pilot B. But if there is an in-flight emergency, I can guarantee you that the pilot that has 30 hours will immediately feel much more comfortable and confident in their ability to deal with an anomalous situation, be able to control their physiological response. And you and I may never find out about that incident. On the contrary, if a pilot has 15 hours a month, we may very well find out about it because it's a Class A mishap.
And our non-combat casualties and fatalities are now higher than in operations than in combat?
Chairman, they are, and I would attribute that to two things. I mean, one, it's the material condition that does affect the numbers of hours that a pilot flies, a driver drives, so forth. It's also the size of the force relative to the requirements that we have. Going back to my lieutenant days, if you think about training, whether it's on a ship, in a plane, or in the infantry as a series of 101, 201, 301, 401 tasks, when I was a lieutenant, we didn't go to 201 until we were confident that we were well-founded in 101, and we didn't go to 301 until we were well-founded in 201. And I would argue that, well, we may have trained a standard in the past when we had sufficient time and resources. Now we're training to time because that ship is going to go to sea, that pilot is going to go to war, that infantryman is going to go to war, whether or not they've had an opportunity to retrain sometimes in the basic tasks or not.
Do you believe it's possible for the United States to achieve its national security objectives in Afghanistan as long as Pakistan provides support and sanctuary to groups such as the Taliban and the Haqqani network?
I do not believe that we can attain our objectives in Afghanistan, Chairman, unless we materially change the behavior of Pakistan.
And have you got thoughts on how you do that?
Chairman, well, it will require a broad approach to do it. I think it's unacceptable that you hit the key issue. It's unacceptable that Pakistan provides sanctuary, and we ought to bring the full weight of the U.S. government and our coalition partners on Pakistan to ensure that they do not provide the sanctuary that they have provided historically to groups like Haqqani and the Taliban.
Are you satisfied now with the rules of engagement which have been changed with the new administration?
Chairman, I am, and I had a long conversation with General Nicholson and NATO over the weekend to ensure that he also had the same degree of confidence. Secretary Mattis has spoken to General Nicholson in the past week to make sure he's confident that he has the rules of engagement that allow him to engage any enemy that is a threat to the Afghan government, our mission, coalition forces, or U.S. personnel.
Some of it reminiscent of our rules of engagement during the Vietnam conflict?
Well, Chairman, they may have been. I can assure you today that we have the rules of engagement necessary to advance our objectives in Afghanistan and to protect the force as well.
Thank you. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General Dunford. In response to the committee's pre-hearing policy questions, you indicated that Iran is adhering to its obligations under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, of the JCPOA, but you do rightfully point out that they are engaged in extremely destabilizing activities in the region, missile development, activities that can't be tolerated. But going back to JCPOA, is it your view that it was designed to limit their nuclear capacity and that it is currently achieving that objective?
Senator, it was designed specifically to address what I would describe as one of the 5 major threats of Iran, the nuclear threat. As you point out, what the agreement didn't address was the missile threat, the maritime threat, Iran's support of proxies, and the cyber activity that they have conducted.
And they're still pursuing those other venues very aggressively, in your view?
They are, Senator, and we see a physical manifestation of that in Yemen. We see it in Iraq. We see it in Lebanon. We see it in Syria.
In this complicated world where there's so much going on, we have our focus on North Korea. If we were to step away from the JCPOA, would that have an effect, in your professional view, on the ability to negotiate or to come to some type of non-kinetic solution in Korea?
Senator, it makes sense to me that our holding up agreements that we have signed, unless there's a material breach, would have an impact on others' willingness to sign agreements.
And in terms of a force that we've all comment on is stretched, if in reaction to rejecting the JCPOA, would you assume that the Iranians would step up their activity even more, causing us to at least in a contingency have forces that would be in that area and not available for Korea?
Senator, I would. We watch every day, and this is even in addition to the JICPOA issue, just our relationship with Iran. We watch every day for indicators that either Iranian-backed militia forces or Iranian maritime forces would pose a threat to the force. We have postured the force to deal with those threats, and we watch the intelligence carefully to make sure our posture every day is in the context of the current threat.
You've said it, and the Secretary of Defense has said it, and the White House has said it too, is that our major effort against North Korea is diplomatic at this moment. Is that accurate?
Senator, it absolutely is. The military dimension today is in full support of the economic and diplomatic pressure campaign that Secretary of State is leading in North Korea.
One of the things that's difficult to comprehend is we do not have an ambassador in South Korea, do we?
We do not. We have a charge at this time, Senator.
And in effect, General Brooks is sort of doing double duty informally?
No, Senator, we're very proud of what General Brooks is doing right now as both he sits there at the nexus of the political military.
No, I'm very, as you have confidence in General Brooks, but if we're in a diplomatic mode, we don't have an ambassador until we don't also have an assistant secretary for the area in the State Department. We just don't seem to have the team in place to have an all-court press for a diplomatic solution. Is that unfair comment, or?
Senator, I certainly probably would comment not only because I have clearly heard Secretary Tillerson also comment on the difficulty he has right now doing all the things that the State Department's been called upon to do with some of the gaps that continue to exist.
In terms of the situation on the peninsula now, can you give us your judgment of where we are today, given the statements back and forth between leaders of both countries, given our aerial operations off the coast, given the response yesterday that could trigger a reaction by the North Koreans? Can you give us an assessment?
Senator, I can. While the political space is clearly very charged right now, we haven't seen a change in the posture of North Korean forces. We watched that very carefully. We clearly have postured our forces to respond in the event of a provocation or a conflict. We also have taken all the proper measures to protect our allies, the South Koreans, the Japanese, the force, as well as Americans in the area. But what we haven't seen is military activity that would be reflective of the charged political environment that you're describing.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Dunford, I'd like to pursue two things. One, intelligence, and the other, modernization. In doing this, I want to get three statements in the record. To begin with, on Sunday, Kim Jong-un released a propaganda video depicting the U.S. aircraft carrier and bomber being blown up by North Korean missiles. He further threatened that a U.S. attack would see our forces, as he said, head to the grave. I've been very proud of the uniforms coming out and talking about how real the threat is. General Hyten, the Strategic Command commander, said last week that he views North Korea's ability to deliver a nuclear weapon on an ICBM as a matter of when, not if. And Defense Intelligence Agency assesses that North Korea will be able to reliably range the U.S. mainland with nuclear ICBMs by the end of 2018. Well, I remember when that 2018 was 2020 and it was 2019. I'd have to ask you how confident you are in our intelligence community's ability to monitor and detect just where they are and how accurate you believe that end of 2018 is.
And Senator, from my review of the intelligence, I think that what General Hyten said and what you've just described reflects the collective judgment of the senior leadership in the department. And I think something that General Hyten said is something I've also said in public is that whether it's 3 months or 6 months or 18 months, it is soon. And we ought to conduct ourselves as though it is just a matter of time and a matter of a very short time before North Korea has that capability.
Yeah, and I think it's important to get in the record. Name a couple of the unique challenges in getting intelligence on North Korea that don't exist in other places.
They may exist to some degree in other places. The North Koreans over time have buried much of their capability underground, which creates unique challenges. There's also some specific weather challenges in North Korea that limits our collection at various periods of time. And to be honest with you, Senator, part of it also has been the competing demand for a limited amount of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Certainly over the last 18 months, we have increased our collection against North Korea, but for a long period of time we had decreased our collection against North Korea because of competing demands elsewhere in the world. So I think those are probably three of the most significant challenges we face.
That's good. And I assume you're equally concerned about their activity in trading technology and missile technology with other countries such as Iran.
Senator, we are. We've looked at that nexus quite a bit. I'm not sure we've seen any transfer of nuclear technology, but we certainly have seen missile technology and a wide range of other weapon systems that they have exported or expertise that they have exported outside of North Korea.
Okay, on modernization, both of the Army Generals Anderson and Murray said recently in our subcommittee, given the complex range of threats, the Army has a very short window to improve capability and capacity. Meanwhile, our adversaries are closing the capacity gap. I think you said, if I wrote it down correctly, you said if we don't have sustained funding, we'll lose our qualitative and quantitative advantage over our adversaries. I think that is accurate. And you've expressed your concern that we're getting very close on that. Is that correct?
I have, Senator, and I think